Chapter 19 of Psychopomp Drive. Written by Janeen Leese-Taylor. Read aloud by Skaya Simaru. Chapter 19. Never Supposed to Know. Finley staggered slightly whenever he felt Thorn fling her arms around him, and he reached up to cradle her shaking body against his. When he had been alive, he had never noticed just how fragile she was. Under the touch of his new doll, her body felt like that of a sparrow. She let out a trembling breath against the side of his neck, the air from inside her as hot as an oven. Finley encompassed her with his strong arms, bringing the side of his face to rest against her hair, and breathing in the smell of her shampoo. He traced his fingers through the dyed pink ends of her well-loved waves. Tears sprung unbidden to his eyes, and he clung to her desperately for a moment, feeling her heartbeat in his chest as if it were his own.
"God, I've missed you,"
he whispered. Thorn let out a choked laugh against his shoulder, sniffing and wiping at her eyes as she pulled back from him only so far as to see his face.
"Jesus, Finn! How is this happening right now? How are you here? I don't understand."
He gave her a soft smile.
"It's a bit of a long story."
She glanced up towards his more cat-like features.
"Yeah, I can imagine."
She reached up with one hand and traced her thumb along his cheek.
"I never thought I would see your stupid face again."
He let out a quiet laugh, then caught himself pulling back from her warm touch.
"You were never supposed to."
She hesitated, bringing her gaze up to meet his.
"Something's really wrong, isn't it?" she noted. "Those things back there, those monsters, that's why you're still here." "Nail on the head, as always," he commented,
exhaling a quiet laugh.
"Nothing gets past you."
She let her hands drop, folding her arms across her chest protectively.
"What are those things, Finn? I keep seeing flashes of them, like they aren't even really there. But I know they are. They make a noise whenever they get too close, like insects chirping."
She shuddered.
"I was trying to get the kids away from them, but there's just too many." "We call them hollows," Finley explained. "They're like bad souls that attack the living. They're here chasing the destroyer."
"Is that what you call that woman that attacked me?" she questioned.
"She had some sort of power. She was throwing those balls of light and, God, everyone was running and the kids were so scared." "Easy, Thorn."
Finley interrupted her accelerating thoughts before they could spin out of control. He rested his hands on her shoulders and gave them a gentle, reassuring squeeze.
"I have to get you and the others out of here before she comes back. They won't be able to see or hear me, so I have to rely on you to guide them for me. Can you do that?"
Her perfect lips drew into a thin line, and she nodded resolutely.
"Just tell me what to do, Finn."
Sparks shot up into the air from beyond the far side of the zoo, and he felt her whole body stiffen in his grip.
"Focus, Thorn," he urged her,
catching her eyes.
"Those kids need us."
She nodded again, and he dropped his hands before reaching out towards her.
"Take my hand," he offered.
She looked down at it and smiled, entangling his fingers with her own. The simple touch was enough to send heat coursing through his veins again. Thorn gathered up the children into small groups, connecting their hands as she counted over each of their heads. The other volunteers listened to her instructions nervously, nodding their understanding even when their expressions clearly showed their doubt. Thorn had told them only what was absolutely essential to know, assuring them that the police and emergency services were already on their way to help. Unfolding a map across one of the flat rocks, Thorn traced along the yellow area with one blue-painted nail. "We're down here," she said, "in Area 33. If we move up here to the purple area—" She drew a line upwards towards Sulawest and Coral Sands. "We can go out through the exit here at number 67, Monsoon Forest." The woman next to her frowned, tucking a strand of her light brown hair behind one ear. "What makes you so sure that way isn't blocked off too?" "They usually keep the access area behind the forest free for emergency vehicles. It takes a lot of maintenance, so they have to be able to get in and out without disrupting the rest of the zoo," Thorn noted. The other volunteer, a tall, skinny man named Harris, nodded his agreement. "If Thorn thinks that it'll work, then I say it's worth trying. We need to get these kids as far away from here as we can before those things come back." They packed their supplies into the children's school bags and arranged each of them into groups that would set off at intervals with the different volunteers. Finley climbed up onto the surrounding buildings and kept a bird's-eye view of their movements, being sure to signal Thorn and the first group whenever he deemed each area as clear. The empty enclosures they passed were worrying. Huge cages and wide green fields alike were all vacant of signs of their previous owners. They passed the dark caves that had once belonged to the painted dogs, and Finley wrinkled his nose as he sniffed the air, the smell of their urine pungent. Educational videos blared on the walls on repeat, left abandoned by the last tour group that had been coming through this way. A stuffed toy dog was laying on its side on the dusty ground, torn open and bleeding white fluff across the false savanna. One of the children let out a shriek, and Finley leapt into action, sprinting towards the group as the hair on his tail stood on end. Thorn hid a laugh in her palm, then raised it as a signal for him to stop. When he did so, she subtly nodded in the young girl's direction. In her arms was a rather fat gray and brown rodent, with a long, thick tail and a very pink nose. It buried its head into the girl's Navy school jumper, and she cooed at it in delight. "What on earth is that?" the teacher asked, leaning in to study the animal curiously. Thorn smiled. "It's a cloud runner. It's a type of rodent from the Philippines." "What is it doing here?" the woman continued, glancing around as if she might see the habitat from the pathway. "There's a Panay exhibit just ahead of us on the right, past Coral Sands," Thorn added knowledgeably. "I knew someone once who really loved these little guys." Finley smiled at her, feeling the same tinge of fondness he always did when he was near her. He always had a weakness for rodents. Like the flying squirrel, the cloud runner spent a lot of its life up high above the world. It wasn't until he had died that Finley realized just how different the world was from up there. Ironic that he should be brought back as a feline spirit in his next life. His head tilted to face the sounds of tiles shifting on the roof above them, wondering if it had been more Amorini passing by. If they had seen him, they didn't make themselves known, disappearing as quickly as they had come towards the source of the fighting behind them.
"We shouldn't linger,"
he advised Thorn, drawing close to her side.
"Once you make it past the Panay area, follow the paths left past the gift shop and straight to Monsoon Forest. If needs be, I can get the gate open for you from the other side."
"Thank you," she replied under her breath, before turning away from him. She raised her voice again as she addressed the group, her colorful hair brushing her shoulders on both sides as she moved. "We need to keep moving, just a little further." Finley used Sassy's blade to pry open the gate just as they arrived, leaving it ajar for Thorn and the others to open it themselves. He climbed up onto the side of the Monsoon Forest and leaned over the glass. It was one of the highest points in the area, and he used the vantage point to finally take in the full devastation that the destroyer had unleashed. Entire areas were black with smoke. Buildings had collapsed, and bridges were torn down. The bodies of animals were strewn about the paths, black with writhing hollows who feasted on what little energy they had left. The voices of the trapped and the injured cried out from the zoo's many islands, and across from them a pack of painted dogs sang a mournful chorus towards the clouds. Standing over them silently, Finley watched as each of the children slipped through the gate and out into the cul-de-sac beyond. The flash of red and blue lights against the cover of the trees told them that the emergency services had finally arrived.
"At least these souls will make it home tonight,"
Sassy commented.
"Not all were so lucky."
When little over half the children had gotten through safely, he picked up the distinct sound of an animal as it approached from the north. The Sumatran tiger growled as it crept towards its prey, eyes wide and alert as the scent of the frightened humans filled its nostrils and made it salivate. Over 2.5 meters from head to tail, the imposing animal was smaller than other zoological specimens of the breed, but no less dangerous, ranging from 100 to 140 kilograms. The animal could have taken down a larger ungulate, such as a tapir or a deer, with little effort. Though no hollows buzzed around this animal's head, Finley knew the bite strength of an animal of its stature was nothing to be sneezed at.
"Thorn!"
Finley shouted, dropping down between the beast and its target.
"Get the kids and get out of here, now!"
Startled, the woman turned to look back the way they had come.
"Finn, what's wrong?"
she shouted, trying to keep the panic from her voice as she rushed the rest of her young tour group through the small passage. Although she couldn't have seen the threat, it was clear from the man's tone that this was not the time to argue.
"I got this! Just run!"
Finley answered her, his tail curling in behind him. The tiger stalked closer to him with a grumble of incoming thunder. Its tail, curved at the tip, thrashed from one side of its hip to the other. It wrinkled its wide, flat nose, and the sides of its jaw and ears rose up and back. Whiskers as translucent as tinted glass splayed as it exposed rows of 3-inch fangs. Finley sensed the power in the animal's frame as it curled inwards, taut as a new guitar string. Without hesitation, the animal sprang forward to pin him to the ground with an impressive leap. Finley shouted in surprise, and they rolled from side to side as they struggled. The tiger snapped downwards, and Finley pressed both hands into the soft spot beneath its throat, trying to direct its face away from his own. Thick paws smacked his arms and shoulders like battering rams, making his ears ring with every impact.
Fuck!
Finley shouted as he began to see stars. The animal was little more than a blur of orange and white over him. Its hot, wet breath rank where it caressed his skin and silvery hair. Desperately, he shoved an elbow into the side of its face to create space, shuffling as he yanked his reaper free from his back. He jammed it in against the tiger's mouth to trigger its gag reflex, all the while kicking at its sides to make it turn. Finding an opening, Finley scrambled away from the animal's grasp, putting just enough distance between them so that he could still remain close to the gate.
"How's it going there, Thorn?"
he shouted without turning. His striped opponent rose with something like a cough, shaking its head as it righted itself. It moved to one side at a slight angle, beginning to circle around him, not wanting to expose his back to the wild cat. Finley copied the motion with his reaper raised high to create some additional height.
"We're through!"
Thorn hollered, pulling the gate shut and wrestling with the metal bars until they slid into place.
"Get out of there, Finn!"
"Right behind you!" Finley responded as he began to back towards the monsoon forest building. Waiting for just the right moment, the Amorini scaled the glass structure, clinging to the sides as the beast below leapt for his feet, swiping up towards him. Finley pulled his tail away with a frightened yelp and buried the head of his battle-axe into the wall above him, using the hilt to heave himself just high enough to be free of the iron gate and the pursuing predator. His legs gave way with a rush of adrenaline as he hit the ground, and he gasped as Thorn rushed to his side from around the corner, the flash of red and blue lights reflecting off her back. She ducked under one arm and hoisted him to his feet.
"That was the most insane thing I've ever seen you do,"
she remarked, keeping the volume of her voice low.
"To be fair, I've been doing a lot of insane things lately,"
he replied, giving her a weak smile. He reached out to brush her face with the back of his hand. She leaned into his touch.
"What happens now?"
she asked softly, her bright eyes glancing back towards the closed gate.
"I'm not sure,"
he admitted. Blue eyes met green, and she leaned in to press her lips to his, like fingertips brushing the glass surface of a plasma ball. Energy fizzled between them when they connected. Something within him came back to life at her touch, his every nerve ending like a live wire. He reached his hand back to encircle her neck, pulling her in to deepen the kiss. He knew it wasn't right, that seeing her again, being with her like this, was a breach of the contract that he had made with Saulo in the in-between. But he couldn't bring himself to leave her. Not again. "Stay with me," he breathed against her lips. He felt her smile as she claimed his lips again. "I will." To be continued in Chapter 20.